All right, I guess we'll go ahead and get started then. Want to thank everyone for sticking around. I know we're getting late in the day here, and thanks to Jackie for the invitation as well. So today, my name is Matthew Corbel. I'm the team lead for Veterans Benefits Resource Center at the Wisconsin Department of Veterans Affairs. So basically, what the Veterans Benefits Resource Center, or VBRC, we like to call it for short, what we do is we serve as the main customer service unit for the central office in Madison, and then also we'll process most non-grant and non-memorial, non-home benefit applications. What we're mainly going to be touching on today are going to be the Wisconsin GI Bill and then the Vet Ed, Veterans Education Reimbursement Grant. So we'll go through the program description, some of the eligibility criteria, application process, and then some of the restrictions and limits that go with both of those programs. Just want to briefly touch on some of the other benefits that we'll handle in the VBRC and at WDVA. So we do have the Veterans Identifier, which is to get the word veteran placed on a driver's license or state-issued ID card. We do the property tax credit for 100% disabled veterans and surviving spouses. We'll do a professional occupational license fee waiver, DNR voucher for returning service member in the last 365 days. We'll certify businesses as veteran-owned as well. And then we do have a couple of grant programs, financial grant program that we call the Assistance to Needy Veterans Grant. And there's both healthcare aid portions of that as well as subsistence aid portions of that. And another one I want to just kind of briefly touch on is our retraining grant, mainly because that can be used for certain technical programs and also for on-the-job training. And basically what the retraining grant is it's for recently unemployed or underemployed veterans who within the last year were involuntarily laid off or discharged from their job due to, basically as long as it was not due to willful misconduct. So with that retraining grant, I believe the maximum that the grant amount is $3,000 per year, and for a maximum of 2 years. And then the amount that's ultimately awarded with the grant kind of does depend on the veteran's financial need. But let's get started on the Wisconsin GI Bill. So in terms of the program description, so what it does, and obviously a lot of you guys know this already, but it will remit 100% of eligible tuition and fees, and that goes up to 128 credits or 8 semesters, whichever one of those ends up being greater. Only at UW schools or Wisconsin Technical College System schools. And with the Wisconsin GI Bill, this benefit is for veterans, in certain cases, spouses and children of veterans as well. So there's no income limits with the Wisconsin GI Bill, no delimiting period during which the benefit has to be used, and then no limits on the level of study as well. So just to kind of go through the eligibility criteria. So when we, the eligibility criteria does differ kind of significantly depending on who the applicant is. So first I'll touch on when the veteran is applying as the student themselves. And when that is the case, there are service and then residency requirements that we have to verify. So in terms of the service requirement, there's really 3 things that we need to verify. So all 3 of these do need to be met. Just going to try and break it down into each of these components of the requirements. So for the service requirement to be met, there's a type of service requirement, a term of service requirement, and also a character of service requirement. So for the type of service requirement we'll go through first. So a couple different ways that this can be met. One way would be if the veteran served on regular active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces. And then also if the veteran was in a Reserve or National Guard unit that was mobilized to active duty or active duty for training, that will also count towards the Wisconsin GI Bill. So it's the certain types of service that would not count for the Wisconsin GI Bill would be if the veteran served only on active duty for special work, or AGR, Active Guard Reserve service would not count towards it. Also, with the wording in the Wisconsin statutes, it is basically limited to armed forces and the forces incorporated into the U.S. Armed Forces. So the uniformed services, NOAA Public Health Service would not be included in this Wisconsin GI Bill. So for the term of service, this is another one where there's a few different ways that it can be met. So one way would be, and this is regardless of whether the type of service is active duty or active duty for training. But basically, as long as the veteran had served on active duty or ADT for at least 90 days during wartime, or if the service was during peacetime, then we would need to verify 2 consecutive years of active duty or active duty for training. Some exceptions do apply, and they're kind of detailed in the statutes up there. But basically, if a veteran was discharged due to a service-connected disability later adjudicated to be service-connected, reasons of hardship, if there's a reduction in forces, that's another one. And then also certain expeditionary medals, if the veteran received those, would basically be exceptions to that 90-day wartime or 2-year peacetime rule. So one thing I wanted to touch on with the term of service, since it's not a super frequent situation, but it does definitely come up every once in a while. And so this is basically strictly for Army National Guard service members who choose to do split option training, where they'll do basic one summer and then do AIT the next summer. So basically, there's certain documents that we need to get for those particular veterans. So the DD-214, they will get when they complete their advanced individual training. So that is one thing that we do have to get for that. Generally, that will show less than 90 days of service during wartime, though. So that's basically the reason why we do have to get additional documentation. So what we would need in addition to the DD-214, one thing is going to be the DD-220. So that's going to be the form that accounts for their basic training service. And so that's the active duty report. And then we basically have to get one of the following documents along with the 214 and 220. So one of the things could be orders that place the veteran on active duty for basic. The second thing would be a copy of the LES or leave and earning statement for the month that they entered basic. And then third thing would be signed copy of Wisconsin income taxes for the year that they would have entered active duty or entered basic training. So next, so that kind of covers the type and term of service, but we also need to verify character of service is met. So obviously one way that can be met is if we see honorable on the DD-214. Same thing if we see general under honorable, that's going to meet that character of service requirement as well. Another situation, so let's say veteran chose to re-enlist and then on the re-enlistment received a bad conduct discharge. As long as they completed their initial service obligation under honorable conditions, they can still meet the character of service requirement for that Wisconsin GI Bill. So again, that's another one where we do have to get more documentation than just the DD-214, since the DD-214 would only show that bad conduct discharge. Generally, we'll have to get a copy of the enlistment contract and re-enlistment contract to show that veteran did successfully complete their initial service obligation under honorable conditions. One thing I wanted to touch on, I know this isn't on the slide here, but so there's certain cases where, and this will mainly apply to Army National Guard and Reserve service members, but if a veteran did complete their active duty for training, if they were assigned an MOS, military occupational specialty, and then received an uncharacterized discharge, which we do see every once in a while. There is an expedited way to try and get that upgraded to an honorable or general under honorable conditions discharge, and that is by going through Army Human Resource Command in Fort Knox, Kentucky. If you do, if a veteran does visit your office that is in this sort of situation where they completed their active duty for training, got an MOS, was returned to their National Guard or Reserve unit, but still gotten uncharacterized, or sometimes you'll see entry level separation will be the character of service on discharge too. refer them to us because we can go through the process with them of requesting that upgrade. And luckily, going through Fort Knox is a lot quicker than going through the formal upgrade process through the discharge review boards and some of the boards for corrections of records. But again, that process really only applies to Army National Guard and Army Reservists. Basically, all the other branches do have to go through the formal upgrade process through either the discharge review board or the board for corrections, depending on basically the date of discharge. So next we'll go through the residency requirements. So that kind of covers the service requirements in terms of the type, term, and character. So basically all three of those need to be met for the service requirement, but then also the residency requirement does need to be met in some way. So basically, when the veteran's a student, they do need to be a current Wisconsin resident at time of application in order for us to provide certification. And then basically either or for these next two. So if the veteran, when they entered active duty or active duty for training, if they were a resident of Wisconsin at that time, and this is, I mean, it's usually indicated on the DD-214. If that's the case, it will say home record of Wisconsin. That is one way to meet that residency requirement. You'll see occasionally, especially on like the 1980s DD-214s, they took home record off the DD-214. So there's basically we have to get other documentation to establish that they were a resident of Wisconsin when they entered active duty, other than DD-214 in that case. So what we'll use would be like income taxes for the year of entry. Most common thing that we'll get is it's form WDVA 1805, which is our veterans residency affidavit. That way the veteran can basically attest that Wisconsin was their home record when they entered active service, and then they do have to get that notarized, but we can accept the 1805 then as proof of home record. So if they were a resident of Wisconsin, that's one way to meet that requirement. Otherwise, there is another way. So if they were in a home record was a different state than Wisconsin, as long as the veteran has been a Wisconsin resident for at least 5 consecutive years immediately preceding application, that will be another way that they can meet that residency requirement. And that's something that that's another thing we can use the WDVA 1805 affidavit for. Otherwise, we'll always look at Wisconsin voting records to try and verify those 5 years as well. Wisconsin income tax filings we can accept. Wisconsin driver's license. So basically after 2007, I believe, is basically you can only hold a driver's license in one state. So if we get a driver's license that was issued after 2007, we can use that as proof of the 5-year residency too. So those are going to be the requirements for those veteran students. So I'll move on to some of the eligibility requirements when we get applications from spouses and then children of veterans. So they do some of the requirements do remain the same. Others do switch significantly. But as you'll see, so we do still have service and residency requirements that we need to verify. And then additionally, there is a disability requirement that comes into play for these dependent or spouse applications. So service requirement, so basically we still need to verify type, term, and character, all three in order to make sure that service requirement is met. So in terms of type of service, largely going to be the same as for those veteran students. So if they served on regular active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces, that will meet the type requirement. Or if they were in the Reserves or National Guard and mobilized to active duty or active duty for training, again, that's going to meet that type of service requirement. And then active duty for special work, active guard reserve, and uniform service would not count still. So the term of service requirement does change for dependent and spouse applicants. So as opposed to where the veteran basically needs the 90 days during wartime or 2 years during peacetime, when they are submitting an application for their spouse or child, they only need technically 1 day of active duty or active duty for training, regardless of whether this is during wartime or peacetime. And yeah, again, just 90 days and 2 years will only apply to the veteran students themselves. In terms of character of service, then, Basically, this will be the same as for the veteran students. So if they received an honorable discharge, and that's indicated on the DD 214, that'll work. Or if we see a general under honorable conditions discharge on the DD 214, that's going to work as well. And then also if they did complete their initial service obligation under honorable conditions and then re-enlisted, and then on that second enlistment maybe received a bad conduct discharge, as long as we receive the proper documentation, show that they completed that first term under honorable conditions, that's going to meet that character requirement as well. So residency requirements is where a lot of the differences start to come into play. And there has been some changes to this within the last year. I believe in September, the Wisconsin State Legislature amended some of the statutes. We'll go through that. So basically, whoever the applicant is, whether it be the spouse or dependent, would need to be a current Wisconsin resident at time of application. And then additionally, so there's again 2 different ways that they can meet that residency requirement. One way is going to be if the veteran was a resident of Wisconsin when they entered active service. So again, that's something that we'll usually see indicated by the home record on the DD 214. Apart from those 1980s discharges where we can use the WDVA 1805 affidavit form or income tax filings, things like that. So basically, before the veteran, in order for their spouse or child to qualify for the Wisconsin GI Bill, had to be a Wisconsin resident at time of entry. That has changed within the last year. So now, basically, as long as the veteran has been a Wisconsin resident for the 5 consecutive years immediately preceding application, that will allow their dependent or spouse to meet the residency requirement as well. And that's something that will be able to accept the same types of documentation as we will for the veteran students. And just keep in mind, we are only really worried about the veteran status, so we're not concerned so much with the dependents or spouse 5-year residency as much as making sure the veteran themselves has been a Wisconsin resident for 5 years. And then we still need to make sure that the dependent or spouse is a current Wisconsin resident when they do apply. And so this page just kind of details that change from this last year. So the act itself is 2017 Wisconsin Act 59. We've kind of gone through, I mean, it really only affects the spouses and children of veterans who were not residents of Wisconsin when they entered active service. This just touches on another expansion under that act. So, and this is going to be very infrequent, but if it let's say a veteran died on active duty, died as a result of a service-connected disability, or died in the line of duty while on active or inactive duty for training purposes, then the spouse or dependent can qualify if the veteran was a resident of Wisconsin at time of death. That we need to make sure of. And then one of the following has to be met. So if the veteran was a resident of Wisconsin at time of entry into service, or if the veteran resided in Wisconsin for at least 5 consecutive years after turning 18, that's going to meet that residency requirement too. So the disability requirement is something that, again, only comes into play for the spouse and dependent applications. So we need to make sure that the veteran has or had a 30% service-connected disability rating with the federal VA. And so basically, they don't necessarily need to be holding that 30% at time of application, as long as they were assigned a 30% rating at any time in the past. So that's kind of the eligibility requirements. Any questions on those right now? So we'll move on to the application process then. So we do have a brochure for the Wisconsin GI Bill. It is out on the table out there as well, but it's called the WDVA B0105. Can also be found on our website if you go to wisvets.com, and you basically have to navigate to the toolkit and then click on forms and brochures, and you can locate the B0105 from there. And same thing with the WDVA 2029 form, which would go to you guys, and then the WDVA 2030 form, which would come to us. So there's in terms of how the veterans can apply. So they can always submit the WDVA 2030 form to us. We'll of course accept paper applications. Veteran students though also have the ability to apply online. So if they visit our online application tool, which is called My WisVets, so basically you can just get there by going to mywisvets.com. The veteran themselves has the option to apply online that way. However, with the capabilities of MyWisVets right now, basically the spouse or dependent of that veteran can't apply through MyWisVets unless they're already in our system, which generally is not going to be the case. So for spouse and dependent applicants, pretty much right now we do still have to get the paper form, WDVA 2030. So in terms of what you would want to send to our office, so of course one thing is going to be that request for certification, the 2030 form. 2029, obviously we'll go to the certifying officials. What we need to get in addition to the 2030, pretty much no matter what, is going to be a copy of the Veterans DD-214. We try and make sure if you're working with a veteran student that they submit one with the character of service indicated on the DD-214. Generally, it's going to be like a member 4 or a member 6 copy. If they bring in a member 1 copy, that will not show character of service, so we can't really use that for the Wisconsin GI Bill. We have to get some form of DD-214 that does show the actual character of service that they received. Also, with so if the veteran's home record was outside of Wisconsin or they were not a resident of Wisconsin when they entered active service, we're going to need to get proof of the 5 years of Wisconsin residency immediately preceding application for the veteran. And so again, that's something we can accept that WDVA 1805 affidavit for, Wisconsin income tax filings, Wisconsin voting records we'll check, and then Wisconsin driver's license issued after 2007. So when you are submitting applications for spouses or dependents, just make sure the student also includes a copy of the disability letter for the veteran showing that they were either hold a 30% rating or held a 30% rating with the federal VA. For spouse applicants, we do have to get proof of relationship. So we do need to get usually a copy of the marriage certificate with the application then. And then in certain cases, if the veteran either died on active duty, died of a service-connected disability, we'll need to get the death certificate or the report of casualty as well. Mm-hmm. Just for the spouse applicants, we do have to get it. Yeah. Yeah. We don't need to get like proof, like for dependent applications, we don't need to get that documentation, but for the spouse applicants, we do still have to get the marriage cert. It's not new. It's just been kind of inconsistent in the past, but basically that's the policy is we do have to get that for the spouse applicants now. Oh, what's it? I mean, if that's part of your guys' process, I mean, it's still our responsibility to verify that. But if that's still part of your guys' process, I would still do that. But again, that is something that it is our responsibility to verify too. So so on this next page, so we've kind of addressed establishing residency for those DD-214s issued in the late 70s or 80s that wouldn't show a home record of Wisconsin. Easy button for that is going to be that WDVA 1805 form. easiest way to do it because veteran can just fill it out and then bring it to a notary public and sign it in front of them and then send it in to us. So if there is any like contravening evidence, one thing that the veteran can do is fill out, we have a form called the WDVA 1035. We don't receive it too often, but it is income tax release authorization form. And we'll basically look for the year that the veteran active duty, and then we can contact Wisconsin Department of Revenue when we get that form, because it authorizes us to check for their residency for that year. So in terms of program responsibilities, we'll determine whether the veteran involved in the request is eligible. We'll notify veteran and educational institution whether or not they're eligible. Obviously, you guys will make all other eligibility determinations and ultimately approve the student. And then of course we're the certifying agency, and the schools are the ones who administer the program. For certain limits and restrictions with the Wisconsin GI Bill. So when the student is in school, they must maintain a 2.0 cumulative GPA in order to continue using the Wisconsin GI Bill. And should it fall below a 2.0, then the student can still enroll, but they would not be able to use the Wisconsin GI Bill at that time and would have to work their cumulative GPA back up to a 2.0 before accessing the Wisconsin GI Bill again. With the age limit, that's really only going to come into play for dependent applicants. So would not really matter what age the veteran is, what age the spouse is, but we can only certify dependents when they're between the ages of 17 and 26. And then that's also going to be the age range that they basically have to use that Wisconsin GI Bill within. Really, no. In terms of when we do certifying, I think like if there may be certain cases where, let's say the veteran or the dependent turns 26 during the middle of the semester, where I think it's more going to be more up to you guys whether you would allow them to finish up that term. But when we receive an application, and if the dependent's 26 or older by then we cannot provide certification. So basically, just wanted to briefly touch on the interaction with the Wisconsin GI Bill and some of the federal GI Bill programs. So veterans eligible for the post 9/11 or forever GI Bill must use that benefit first before using the Wisconsin GI Bill. Credits and semesters supported by the federal benefits would not be deducted from the 128 credits or 8 semesters that the student would be entitled to from the Wisconsin GI Bill. And then also students certified for partial federal benefits and for the Wisconsin GI Bill can use both benefits in a single term, but the Wisconsin GI Bill would only pay the difference for any tuition or fees that it would normally cover. These are some exceptions to the rule. I know this is on some of the FAQ pages and everything like that, so I won't go into too much detail. How are we doing on time? Yeah, let's try and I just want to make sure to get to the vet ed grant with you guys too. So with the Veterans Education Grant, it's a tuition reimbursement model, so it's not like the Wisconsin GI Bill where it's tuition remission. It's basically the amount of reimbursement is based on the length of active duty, and this benefit is only going to be for veterans, so it's not going to be for dependents or spouses of veterans.
Excuse me, Matt.
Yep.
Before you get into vet ed, just a couple quick ones, and I don't expect you to have answers today about this, but the first one is ADT. You present active duty for training. I'm not aware, and it may just be my deficit, I'm not aware of any statutory basis for saying ADT counts in terms of eligibility for the Wisconsin GI Bill. I would be interested to know how it counts for, as far as I understand it, it doesn't count for eligibility for federal benefits, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't count for the most of WDVA's other benefits. So I'm wondering what the statutory basis is for saying it counts for the Wisconsin GI Bill, and that has huge ramifications for how people use the National Guard tuition grant and other things. It has huge financial ramifications. So I know we're not going to sort of get that decided today, but just be aware when it's presented as sort of a fact in a PowerPoint. I'm not sure. Again, it would be helpful to know what the statutory basis of that is. And the second one is on the application. We talk about the veteran entering service from Wisconsin, and when you talk about 5-year veterans, you talk about them being residents at the time of application. But what is WDVA's position on a non-resident veteran?
So non-resident.
Applying for the Wisconsin GI Bill. At the time of application, they're a non-resident.
Would you mean for the veteran students themselves, or if they're applying for like a spouse or dependent?
Either one.
If the veteran is a student themselves, they would need to be they would not be able to be a non-resident for us to provide certification. They would have to be a current Wisconsin resident in that case. So the way that I understand that requirement for dependents and spouses is whoever the applicant is must be a current Wisconsin resident. So in that case, the dependent or spouse must be a current Wisconsin resident. Well, the veteran in that case could possibly be living outside the state of Wisconsin. But yeah, so any other questions like on the Wisconsin GI Bill before we move on to more vet ed information? Okay. So basically, with the vet ed, so it's not basically only going to be available to veterans who have not yet received a bachelor's degree. And then reimbursement is issued following successful completion of the course at an eligible school. So vet ed is not as strictly limited like the Wisconsin GI Bill to just UW or Wisconsin Technical College System schools. The school still must be approved by either, I guess, EAP now through in DSPS or by SAA. And then also veterans who are eligible for the Wisconsin GI Bill and plan to attend a public institution need to use those Wisconsin GI Bill benefits in order to be eligible for vet ed. So it's basically kind of an either or proposition in that case. And then veterans themselves cannot use both the Wisconsin GI Bill and vet ed concurrently. And then with vet ed applications, they are due within 60 days after the start date of the academic period. So with the Veterans Education Grant, so eligibility for this benefit is based on the Wisconsin Chapter 45. So the service requirements do differ from the Wisconsin GI Bill. So basically with this one, 88 active duty training time is not going to count. It basically veteran does need to have served on active duty generally for at least 90 days during wartime or 2 consecutive years during peacetime. And so the residency requirement for our Chapter 45 benefits and for the vet ed grant is basically the veteran, if they were a resident of Wisconsin at time of entry into active service, that will be one way to meet it. They also, no matter what, have to be a current Wisconsin resident to qualify for the vet ed grant. And then also, if they were not a resident of Wisconsin at time of entry, if they have been a Wisconsin resident for at least 12 consecutive months, that will be another way to meet the residency requirement for the vet ed grant. There is an income requirement also with the vet ed grant that does rule out a lot of applicants. So basically, to be eligible, the household income has to be below $50,000. If for each dependent in excess of 2 dependents, you would add $1,000 to that. And then generally, to determine that income, our grant specialists will use the adjusted gross income from the current tax return. In terms of the amount of reimbursement, so the maximum amount of credits that a veteran could get in terms of reimbursement depends on their amount of active duty. So let's say a veteran served on active duty for 90 to 180 days. That will entitle them to 30 credits or 2 semesters of reimbursement. If they served 181 to 730 days of active duty, that's going to be 60 credits or 4 semesters. And anything above 730 days will equate to 120 credits or 8 semesters of reimbursement. So with the Vet Ed grant, this is another one that we can accept the paper application for, and that's WDVA form 2200. This is another one where veterans themselves, if they have a MyWisVets account, can apply online through the school or through the county veteran service office. What we need to get for the Vet Ed grant generally will be, if you do submit the paper application, the form 2200, a copy of the DD-214 for the veteran, another one where we do need to see the character of service listed on that DD-214. If the veteran was not a resident of Wisconsin at time of entry, then we do need to receive proof of at least 12 consecutive months Wisconsin residency. Types of documents that we can accept for that are similar to what we would use to verify the 5 years for the Wisconsin GI Bill. So Wisconsin income taxes, voting records, driver's license, or our residency affidavit. And then also, in terms of verifying that income requirement, we would need to receive the Form 1040 or electronic copies of the federal income tax filings. So again, with the Vet Ed, there's certain limits and restrictions. So we can accept applications for it outside of the 60 days after the start of the academic period. And then also, this is another one where the veteran must achieve a 2.0 for the period for which they're requesting reimbursement. And then if the cumulative GPA falls below 2.0, if a veteran is using the Wisconsin GI Bill, then they can't use the Vet Ed to try and get that cumulative GPA back up to above a 2.0 to try and use the Wisconsin GI Bill again. So there is a delimiting date with the Vet Ed grant as well, where they can use the Vet Ed up to the 10-year anniversary of separating from active duty, and after that point can only be reimbursed for up to 11 credits per academic period, and also after those 10 years, a maximum of 60 unused credits would be banked. Just to touch on some of the interactions with the federal benefits. So it is possible in certain cases where the Vet Ed grant can be used in conjunction with federal benefits. But just keep in mind that the Vet Ed is generally going to be a benefit of last resort. So veteran has to exhaust eligibility for pretty much all other educational benefits before the Vet Ed is going to be available. For specific questions on the Vet Ed grant or retraining grant, our point of contact at WDVA is Leslie Busby Amagashi. And in case you can't read that, her phone number is 608-266-3575. If you do have just general questions on the Wisconsin GI Bill, you can either contact me or our VBRC. So both those numbers are up there. The VBRC number is 1-800-947-8387. For myself, if you want to contact me, I'm going to be at 608-266-1309. And then in terms of other policy questions, legal questions, point of contact for that is going to be my supervisor, Brian Jones, and his phone number is 608-267-1782. So yeah, thank you everyone for coming, and I appreciate it.